Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I will be discussing my ranking of the Wheel of Time book series. I will be talking about all 14 of the books in the regular sequence, as well as New Spring, the 15th book. I will say that this video will not really have major spoilers in it. However, there might be a moment where I say, oh, well, this scene with Rand on this, or with Mat on this, might be a spoiler because to know they're still alive by a certain point might be considered spoilers. But I really won't be getting into situational spoilers much, or really anything, oh my goodness, when he died, I will be avoiding that. So you don't really have to worry about major spoilers, but I'll let you as the audience determine if you think it's too much. But if you've read the book series, you know what I'll be referring to with all of this. So I have the 15 books in 3 categories. For me, the low category, which is just good. I think the books are okay. They were fun reads. Then I have the great category, which was, these were really good books. I loved reading them, but there was elements I still didn't love in them, but as a whole, I really enjoyed them. And then you have my awesome-tastic, spectacular, wonderful, which is the top 5. And really, all of these are just like 10 out of 10. I loved these last 5 books on that I'll be talking about. And it'll be interesting to see if you have a similar list. So let me know in the comments down below what you think. Without much further ado, let's get right into it. Number 15 on my list is going to be New Spring. I felt so frustrated reading this book. I had already finished the entire Wheel of Time series. It had been about 6 months since I had read the Wheel of Time series, and I thought, it'll be fun to read the prequel. And I read it, and it just didn't add much for me. I like the cover art, I like the nostalgia that it produced, but as a story, I just thought it was boring. I thought it didn't add much, and I thought that this stuff could have just been part of the main sequence of stories instead. I get the value it has. It's the one Wheel of Time book that I just felt was unnecessary as a whole, as a read. I think that you can understand everything that needs to happen without reading this book, but this is like a bonus, like, hey, read this is fun. So that's my number 15. Number 14 on the list for me is going to come as no surprise to anyone who's read Wheel of Time, is Crossroads of Twilight. This and the rest of the books in this tier are what we call the slog, and I know some people hate when we use that term, and I'm like, I get it. Like, I like this book. Whereas this book I just didn't care for. I do like this book, but it is by far the weakest compared to the top books. For instance, I still gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars when I read it, because when you think of all the books that I read, Wheel of Time and otherwise, this is a fantastic book. But when you compare it to its fellow Wheel of Time books, you realize just how weak it really is. So it's still a fantastic book. I loved reading. The ending of this book, when a certain character gets captured by a certain group, oh my goodness, I have never wanted to read another book so fast. I picked up the next book, Knife of Dreams, like that. I had to know what happened. I thought that was an excellent ending for the book. So this is number 14 for me. Number 13 is Winter's Heart, again, going through the slog books. This book, I loved it. I really enjoyed it. I liked some of the moments between Rand and all the women that he's around. I liked a lot of the Mat storyline in this book, which Mat is a character, of the main characters in the books, Mat's the one I like the least. But this was when I started being like, oh, I don't hate him. He's okay. And I really like his storyline with in this series, this book and the continuation books. And that's something I forgot to mention was in Crossroads of Twilight, Mat's scenes are just funny. And same in here. Then the next book on my list, my number 12, is The Path of Daggers. Again, this I think is the book I remember the least about. I remember really liking it. There isn't anything in here that I really dislike that I can remember. Whereas with the other books I mentioned previously, there was stuff I remember that I dislike. But in this book, I don't really remember what I like either. This was the one that I feel like on a reread will do the best for me. Most for me, I should say. Then you have A Crown of Swords. And this book, it did so much right and so much wrong. I really liked the Rand, and I really liked the Mat stuff in this book. I didn't particularly care about the Aes Sedai storyline in this one at all. But I felt like of all the slog, this was the strongest of the slog, and it went straight downhill for me before it went back uphill. So that's the weakest tier. It's still very enjoyable book series. Wheel of Time is my number one favorite fantasy series. Like, I absolutely love it, but there's always weak parts in every series. It's kind of like when you read a trilogy, you have the first book is amazing, second book meh, third book utterly amazing. That's essentially what the Wheel of Time kind of is. Next, I will be going into my middle tier. This is the really, really good tier, but just has a few things that I just didn't like in them. The first book I will be discussing, which is my number 10, is The Dragon Reborn. Of the first three books, I think the first three kind of form a little bit of a trilogy. This one was weakest because it didn't have Rand in it. Rand, of course, is my favorite character. I mean, he's in it, but he's not really in it, if you get what I mean. But this book, what makes it so good is the whole Tar Valon sequence of events and all the Aes Sedai stuff. Those two things really make this just a brilliant read. And I liked where we were going in this book, but how we got there just was the misstep, and then, of course, not having Rand. But still highly enjoyable. I remember where I was reading this book when I got to this finale of this book, and I was like, "Oh, that's a brilliant finale," and it got me wanting to read more. Book 9 on my list is The Fires of Heaven. This was when the series got much longer per book, and when it got much more heavier as material. And of course, the ending of this book, as lots of Robert Jordan's endings are, was brilliant. I thought it was epic and huge. I did not like what they did with Rand in this book with Aviendha and the whole love triangle thing. I don't know how to describe that better. You know what I'm talking about. I did not like how they did that in this book, but it gets better in the other books. But what made this one so strong was you had Rand's whole storyline of he has just been in with the Aiel, and he's now coming out, and he's trying to reestablish power. And this is a book that has some great Moraine moments in it as well, and also some great. This book is the one. The absolute standout of this book is what the Aes Sedai do to a certain member of their group. I was like, oh my goodness, that is brilliant. I loved reading every moment of that, and I really want to see how they do that on the show. But they've already basically revealed that they're going to be doing that. If you've watched the trailer, you'll know what I'm talking about. So I'm really excited to see that. But this was my number 9. Number 8 on my list is going to be The Eye of the World, which I still absolutely love. This is a book that's very derivative of The Lord of the Rings, and I totally get why people don't like it because of that, but for me, that's exactly why I love it. It deals with the same tropes that Lord of the Rings have. Once you get past this book, every book is its own unique type of storyline, but this one really is following the Fellowship of the Ring quite a bit. But I still love it. I think that this book takes some of the good of Lord of the Rings and brings it in, and leaves some of the bad of Lord of the Rings out. I think this is why the first season of the Wheel of Time show thus far, as I'm recording this, I'm about 4 episodes in, thus far it's been utterly fantastic. They've had to change some things, but what they've kept has just been so much fun to read. And just the way that the party gets together, the way you're introduced to all the characters, the whodunit of who's the dragon reborn, all fantastic in this book. And then you have the next book, moving up one slot to my number 7, is going to be Lord of Chaos. I thought this was an excellent book. I thought that the epic battle at the end that everyone knows about, that huge battle, was good. I thought that bringing back Perrin, who was missing in the Fires of Heaven, was good. I thought that the Aes Sedai plot, bringing them in, was good. I was shocked when a certain character was captured in this book. That was amazing. and so I really enjoyed this book. Only problem was this one felt too long. I felt they should have cut some stuff, but as a whole, highly enjoyed this one. And then number 6, the top book of this group, of the middle group, where it's great but not amazing, is The Great Hunt, the one I'm kind of rereading right now. This book has some fantastic sequences in it, and the whole theme of this book being The Great Hunt. It's the most obvious title of the whole series. Was lots of fun to read. My only issue with the book was I felt that they could have foreshadowed a bit more in this book. There were some things that they didn't foreshadow well enough, and so this book made me think I need this thing to happen, among this relationship to develop among the characters. And then in book 4, Jordan completely did a 180 on that storyline, and I wish he had either foreshadowed the 180 or had stuck to this. Either one. And this has something to do with Rand that I'm referring to, Rand and another character. But this book has quite a bit of Loial in it, who is one of the best characters in The Wheel of Time, and I just think that of the middle books, this is by far the best. Now we're getting into the top 5 books, where I'm really just going to be gushing the whole time. I absolutely love these books. I think they're totally worth the read. I think that these books are the reason The Wheel of Time is the powerhouse series that we know of as today. And my number 5 book is Knife of Dreams. Every book before this had a super long prologue with so much exposition and so much world building, and this one had action in the prologue, and I was like, whoa, we're starting this okay. And my cousin Daniel, who was the one who introduced me to the Wheel of Time series, he basically summed up this book as Jordan realized his mortality in this book. This was the last book that Jordan wrote before he died, before it ended up getting taken over by Brandon Sanderson later. And this book was just the whole action front to back, the whole Aes Sedai plot, and the whole imprisonment plot with a certain character was fantastic. The way that it connected from the last book was great. The way it set up the next book was utterly fantastic. And this was when the Q series kicked up quite into high gear, and it never left that high gear, in my opinion. The next book I'll talk about is The Towers of Midnight by Brandon Sanderson and Robert Jordan. This is the second book that Brandon did, the kind of middle one in his 3-book series that he did. It's a thick book, but despite that fact, it's actually not quite as long as the others because the way that the font works is differently. I don't know why they did that. That's very weird in the paperbacks. I wish they had kept the same font so that we could differentiate sizes. Now we have to differentiate words instead. But still, this is an excellent book. Everything about it. This book, I was so mad at some of the characters. But that's good. It meant that I was feeling invested. It meant that the author was doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing. And I loved the whole trial sequence in this book. And the whole Towers of Genji sequence was fantastic. We got a note from a certain character in the last books that utterly had me giggling with excitement because this was my favorite character, or one of my favorite characters, who was potentially returning, and this book delivered on that promise. Oh, it was so good. The next book on my list, going back earlier, you probably figured out, by this time, he just loves the Brandon Sanderson books, which I do. I think Brandon Sanderson did an excellent job with the ending, but there was one book that was a Robert Jordan book that still holds up really well, and among the fandom really holds up, and that is The Shadow Rising. This book is fantastic because of what it does with Perrin. With Perrin's whole storyline with the Waygates, with returning to a certain town, with his storyline with Faile. The fandom has a very much hate-hate relationship with Faile. I like her, and I particularly like her in this book. And I loved everything that... Just this whole book, cover to cover, was fantastic. If I have a tiny gripe with something towards the beginning of the book, but Rand developed as a character that I loved in this book. This was the book that made Rand my favorite character in the series. And so I really liked reading about this. Then I have A Memory of Light as my number 2. This book delivered on the promise that the other books had been promising for years. This was the epic conclusion to the series, and I couldn't have asked for a better conclusion. It was just fantastically done, phenomenally done. You have other series where someone else finished. So let's say the Game of Thrones, the Song of Ice and Fire series. Martin still hasn't finished that series, but the writers of the TV show, Benioff and Weiss, finished the TV show, and they just ran it in the ground. That is not the case with this book. This book, it was elevated by Brandon's writing and by the way that it was created, and just everything about this book made me giggle with glee. And when I read the last pages of this book, I just cried, because it was like I was saying goodbye to all my favorite characters. It was like saying goodbye to friends almost. It was just so good. And this book was so good. But if you've been counting numbers and thinking about which books are missing, you'll know that my number 1 favorite book of all of the Wheel of Time is by far The Gathering Storm. You've heard me talk a lot about Rand in this so far, and Rand in this book is at his Rand. Well, I can't say that. He's the best of Rand. He is so good in this book, as are all the other characters. The Perrin Fail storyline is great. The Mat storyline is really good. Everything in this book was fantastic. The whole White Tower and Tar Valon sequence, the battle and everything there was fantastic, and all the Ajas and all their stuff happening was great. And the setup that this created for the last books in the trilogy was epic. But if I'm going to say something, and if you know, you know, Rand on Dragonmount. Absolute favorite of the moment of the entire series, bar none. I cannot wait to see that moment when it comes to the big silver screen. And I believe is also Brandon Sanderson's favorite moment that he got to write. And so I just, that moment alone puts this in the top tier. And then when you add everything else that this book did right, it's my number 1. So let me know what your ranking is, what your thoughts on The Wheel of Time. Are you enjoying the TV show? Did you enjoy the books? Are you reading the books currently? Leave a comment down below. Please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, and look for other fantasy-related videos on my channel. I don't do them too often, but I try to because it's my favorite genre. I just don't read it as much anymore. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.